Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can always read my work on ESPN.com. First off, happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Hope it's a good one for you. Secondly, to those who were expecting the live stream last night, well, I had said on the previous podcast I wasn't going to be doing it because just became very complicated and tough this week, had some obligations, etc. So I will return to those next week. And for you gold members, I'll be doing the private Zoom again next week as well. Just a tough week for that because of the week that it is. Anyways, so and I appreciate everybody sticking with this, tuning in during a 3-game losing streak. But because it's a tough week, I wanted to bring on someone who provides really good insight and analysis of situations. That's former Washington Redskin tight end Logan Paulsen. Now, of course, does a lot of work for the team, does some work with Craig Hoffman on the Take Command podcast, etc. So wanted to ask him, listen, what's it like for players during the holidays? It's tough. You got families of their own too. So it's not easy. You have to maintain your focus. How do you do that? Logan was a bit of a nut. He'll explain why. What's it like how hard is it to get out of these kind of losing streaks? What does he think is going on and how can you go about fixing it? Folks, it's not as simple as you get Terry the ball early. Like it's not that simple. In fact, there were some targets earlier that they just didn't connect on. So anyways, I know you need to get him more involved, but it's not that simple. It's not as simple as say, oh, Cliff's offense don't do well in the second half of the year. Never quite that simple, folks. So wanted to bring Logan on to touch on all those topics for you because I know those are all things that you are interested in. Also, as a reminder, I will be doing another podcast for Saturday, my 5 things I think. That's the next one that comes out after this. Just with this, that's it. We'll get to Logan for today, and then we'll get to my 5 things I think on Saturday to get you ready for the Commanders game against the Titans. Whether 3-game losing streak or not, it's a big game because things can change in a week. The Titans are playing better. They're not unbeatable. So this is another winnable game at home that you have to go out and take care of your business. If you can, you go into the bye feeling much better about yourself. And so without further ado, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's going on with the Commanders with former Washington tight end Logan Paulsen. All right, Logan, always good to see you. So, because this is Thanksgiving week, first of all, happy Thanksgiving and to everybody listening. But I am curious, like, I have heard that players are human too. So, is it hard for players around holidays how hard is it to maintain that focus around these times? Whether you got family coming in, family there, whatever. Is it hard?
Yeah, I always found it very hard. When I lived by myself, it wasn't that hard because it just was any other day, right? You just
Mhm.
kind of go to work, do your thing. But when I got married or my fiance, my girlfriend moved out, like that was different because she wants to do something for Thanksgiving and she should want to do something for
Right.
Thanksgiving. So you want to go get that done, but you still have to kind of prep the normal week. And then as my kids got older, that was another kind of thing that I need to deal with because they're off school. They're like, Dad, where are you? Like, are we going to go look at the Christmas tree lights? When we go get our Christmas tree? So, and all that stuff's important, no doubt, because like you said, you are human beings. There's more to
Mhm.
life than football. But in season, I don't think people understand to be good and competitive at football, you have to block out a lot of stuff. You have to be a little bit of a selfish, kind of psychopathic person in a way in terms of prioritizing ball and prioritizing football. And I think that, that became hard as I got older and your family gets bigger and you have more relationships in the area and you want your family to come out because it is distracting. It's taking time and mental focus away. And then also like to be totally honest, like you want to spend time with those people. And it's like the softer underbelly of your calcified football soul like wants to break out and be part of it. I know that sounds really dramatic, but that's 100% speaking from experience. I should get my wife on here. She can tell you how crazy it was when I was playing about how locked in I was. And it is hard. It's hard and it's hard for the emotional element of it. It's hard for the time element of it. So yeah, it makes a little bit of sense why guys are maybe, this is a tough time of year and not having the bye to this point is also making it tough. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of factors in here that make it challenging to lock in.
Would you sneak away to watch film?
Usually I was pretty good about not sneaking away, but I wouldn't come home until like, so let's say we're having dinner. My wife wanted to have dinner at 6. I'm like, I don't get done at the facility till 7. So I'll be home at
Even
7:30.
on Thanksgiving, you were there that
Oh
late.
man, I was a little bit of a psycho. On Thanksgiving, I try to like make sure that I got in early in the morning so I could leave early. But again, like you got to get done what you got to
Yeah.
get done. Like I was talking to one of my old coaches, and I was like, "Are you doing anything fun for Thanksgiving?" And he was like, "No, we'll do something for dinner, but I'm not leaving because we got to get ready for whoever we're playing this week." And I was like, that's the life of a coach, the life of an NFL kind of purist is hard for the normal fan to understand, I think.
And you have to have a wife who really gets it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you know that, having been a
Yeah.
beat reporter on this team for a long time, you've got, all your deadlines and things like that, and so you need someone very special that understands the commitment, understands the time, and understands the focus required to be, the best at the world at your job. And I'm not saying, when I was playing, I was the best tight end of all time, but I was striving for kind of that perfection, and it took everything I had to get there, and so. My wife obviously was very supportive, and my family was very supportive of that goal at the time.
But listen, there's a reason why you lasted a long time as an undrafted guy. Seriously though, it's hard. It's this league is too hard, and like at your position with what you did, you're always going to be on that edge. So if you don't maintain that edge, it could be the last. Like that Thanksgiving might not be as happy the next year if you're not maintaining that edge, right?
Oh, yeah, that's what someone told me. They said, Logan, your superpower is the ability to grind and study
Yeah,
and prepare and make sure you know everything. And so I might not have run a 4.2 or, jumped a 41-inch vertical or bench press 500 pounds or whatever it was, but I could grind. And I knew that I knew every element of the game plan that I needed to know. And that came from a little bit of psychotic preparation. And so, again, yeah, my wife was awesome. My family was awesome in terms of supporting me in that goal. And, it did make the holidays a little bit challenging at times for sure.
how easy is it to get in and out of a rut in the NFL? Like you look at this team was going really well, now it's not. How easy is it to get in and out of this?
I think it can be really hard. They've done a lot of analytics studies, kind of data studies, data-driven studies on momentum and whether it's real. And I think that's something that I always have a hard time with because the psychology of a person, of a human being, you automatically believe in momentum. You have a little bit of superstition and like if you're not playing well, you tend to overtry, you overstudy. And in reality, you should just kind of refocus your vision back to the small details and kind of say, these are the things that got me here. Let's do this. And so I do think it can be really challenging if you don't have the right type of leadership on the team. And I'm not saying that this team doesn't, but I do
Right.
think this team has some young leadership, specifically at the quarterback spot. And this is not an indictment of Jaden Daniels in any way. It's just you have to lose games and go through a little bit of a rut in order to learn what it takes to get out of a rut.
True.
And I think he's very fortunate that he does have such an experienced staff and, veterans like Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz and Terry, guys that have that in their background. But again, I think he's got to learn that on his own. And there's also other young players, Luke McCaffrey or, Mike Sanders still, guys that need to understand what it takes to get out of there. And it's not easy. And I think that's something that, talking with Dan for the game plan show that comes out on Sunday, that he said it's like in some ways this is good because losing teaches you something, and the one thing it teaches you is what it takes to get out of a rut.
Right.
And I think that's something that'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on moving forward.
Well, it's also because, and it's funny because what I've seen with Dan Quinn, he embraces whatever the situation is they're in, and I think that's a good thing. Like clearly he doesn't want to lose, but if you have the loss, how do you make something out of it, right? And
Yeah.
his other thing he was saying Monday is you learn about your adherence to standards not when you're winning, but when you're losing. And would you how much would you see that as a player where people think, oh, we have this good culture, and then you get tested and you realize you don't?
Yeah, I think every time you lose a game in the NFL, you feel that. And again, I'm not trying to be over dramatic, but it makes sense. Like coaches' livelihoods depends on winning football games. Your livelihood as a player depends on how many games you win. If you're on a bad team, you're not getting signed to a new contract the next year. I'll tell you that right now.
Right.
So everybody feels the weight of losing. And what is the psychology of that staff, of that team when you're losing games? I think it's important to kind of be self-reflective because I had guys that would be extra coaches that would be extra critical in a loss, extra critical at practice. They'd yell more. And are you adhering to the same standard as when you were winning? Probably not. Like if you had been coaching with that same verve and that same energy when we were winning games and making these same corrections, would we have lost a game? Would I have
Mhm.
lost a game as a player if I had been given more attention to, ball security when we're winning, more attention to my technique when we're winning? And I think that's something that, again, it shows you where the standard is, like where you can get better. And so I think that 100%, yeah, like it's really challenging, I think, to hold the standard and be who you are every day in the NFL when you're losing football games. And that's why it's so tough to play in the NFL.
You've been around, Dan, in Atlanta when there's some losses. Like, how do you think this staff will handle this situation?
That's the one thing about Dan that I probably, obviously I respect him as a human being, as a man. I've talked about that before with you and maybe on this show. But I think the one thing that Dan does such a great job of is he is the same guy. He's going to trust the process. He's going to trust the infrastructure that he's put in place. And I think that's the right idea. When things get bad, when you're in a storm, you don't freak out. You go back to the basics. You go
Mhm.
back to, hey, am I steering the boat correctly? Are the lashings tied down? I don't try to, do something magical and crazy. And I think that's something that I always appreciated about Dan. And he did that better than probably any other coach that I played with. Kyle and Sean did a great job of that also, but he had a special knack for that. So I do think, like, yeah, you gotta tell the truth. You gotta be honest with the players. You gotta be honest with the coaches. You gotta say, hey, these are areas we can improve. You gotta take that, but you don't have to be psychotic about it. You don't have to make an environment where people get stressed out and can't operate at their best. And I think, like, that's something that he does a great job of, and makes me very confident that they'll be able to figure it out. Now, and it might not be versus Tennessee, but they'll figure it out at some point this year, and that is valuable for a team in year one of a staff to kind of understand what it takes, not only for the players but for the coaches to get out of something like this.
And because he talked too about like wanting the offense and all that to get back to playing with a certain attitude and mentality and all that, which I would agree with. But I also wonder too, and I said on the show yesterday, that 4th and 2 in the first one, I think was maybe reflective of that. Like, if you're in that certain mindset, are you going for it, or was that, and I haven't talked to him about that, but I do wonder, like, does that play into it or does it not? Was that a good decision? Was it not? Or is that indicative of where maybe things are at with them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That's something only Dan can answer.
Correct.
But
Right.
when you're watching on the sideline and you get used to a certain way of game flow, you go, oh, like they're probably going to go for this, and they kick a field goal. I think it could say a couple things. One, it can be like, oh, he's getting too conservative. He should have been more aggressive. Also, it could just say, hey, I really feel very confident in my team where they're at right now,
Mhm.
that the defense is going to be able to hold Dallas and the offense is going to be able to score points. This isn't the last time we're going to be down here in the red zone. And honestly, like, when he did that, I was like, I kind of felt the same way based on the film study, based on my expectation for the offense, based on how the defense had played to that point. I thought that's not a bad decision. Take the points. You'll be back down here. This offense will figure it out in the score. Obviously, that's not how it went, and so that decision gets kind of honed in as a microscope. And I think the other thing too is when there's a team that you think and you believe and partially that you're better than, you don't want to give them any life. So getting a fourth down stop there in his mind and again, this
Yeah,
is
no,
totally
no.
hypothetical, may have been more deleterious than kicking the field goal, right? Or the advantage of getting the first down. And I totally understand that because I believed going into that game that Washington was significantly better and their
Me
offense
too.
was going to be able to figure it out and the defense was going to be able to hold them to 10 points. Part of that was true and the other part wasn't. And I think every decision in hindsight looks looks much more clear. But in that moment, I wasn't like, "Oh, this is a terrible decision." Did I think for a second that they were going to go for it? Absolutely. But when he made the decision, I wasn't like, "Oh, this is bad," because I believe that he believed that this team was better, and I still think that when we play them again in a couple of weeks, or when the Commanders play them again in a couple of weeks, they will be the better football team.
Now, by the way, I think we have a bunch of people scrambling to look up deleterious. So I appreciate that. That's the first time I've heard that word's been used on this podcast. So I really thank you for that. But going to the offense. So, and that, to me, I was just wondering about, like, was that like indicative of like how things might like indicative of the where they're at with any, but whatever. What we do know is they've had O-line issues with health and all that. So when you look at the offense, how do you it's never one thing. So how do
Yeah,
you parcel out what hasn't worked? And how long do you is to me it really looks like it's been a 2 game slide for them,
yeah.
not some extent thing. So when you look at it, what how do you break it down as to what's gone wrong?
Yeah, I think the thing that sticks out to me is even early in the season, this was something that I knew was going to be hard to sustain. And what I'm looking at there, like in terms of sustainability, is it's very rare and very challenging for teams to go on 15, 16,
Yes.
17, 18 play drives. And there's a reason for that. Like every play has an element of risk associated with it, that you're not going to complete the pass, that the run's going to get bogged down, whatever it is. And so there were elements that I think you saw in the Giants game and the Chicago game where they're still able to find explosive plays. They're still not quite as efficient as they were at the beginning of the year, but they're able to cover it up with explosive plays, right? And then you get into the Philadelphia game, the efficiency's down and the lack of explosive plays are
Right.
also down. So it's kind of this perfect storm of my efficiency's not as good, but those high risk, high reward plays that we occasionally hit in Chicago against New York are not there to support that either, right? And so I think that's the thing that I look at when I'm looking at offense is early on in the season that was not sustainable. They were able to cover up some of that when they were able to manufacture and find explosives. When both of those things kind of dried up in these last two games, the result was what it was. And I honestly say that you see in the second half or the fourth quarter of this game what it means to find explosive opportunities, right?
Yes.
Jaden Daniels has an explosive run. Terry has an explosive catch. There's an explosive completion to De'Ami Brown. You see how the offense all of a sudden comes to life. The defense has to loosen up. There's more opportunities there. And so I think this game is a really good microcosm of what we're talking about. In the first half, you're trying to manage down to down efficiency, right? You're trying to complete a slant. You're trying to get 5 yards on a run. And when you get 3 yards on a run and you drop the slant, you punt. Now, all
Right.
of a sudden, when we get into the fourth quarter, we see an explosive opportunity down the field. We see them get into their hurry up. We see them get into their no huddle. They're operating with tempo. The momentum of the offense is cooking, and they're able to string some plays together and score points. So I think that to me is a really good juxtaposition of how I feel about the offense and how I feel about NFL offense in general, not just with this team. When you
Right.
watch teams that are good, they find ways to be presentably efficient on first and second down, but also find ways to find explosives. And I think when you look at, for example, Detroit is a really good example of this. They find really high completion percentage, really high offensive efficiency because they run the ball well, but they also are very explosives. And right now, the Commanders are struggling in both of those areas until the fourth quarter of this last game.
Is it as simple as get Terry the ball in the first half?
What's funny is when I went back and watched the film, they were trying to get Terry the ball in
Yeah.
the first half. They were trying to get him some explosive opportunities. On the first
Run
drive, I
down
think
the
it was the
field. Yeah.
on the second play of the game, they're running Skinner, what I would call Skinner's a double post,
Hmm.
and Terry's wide open, but good job by the Dallas defense. They end up
Right.
bringing two to the back. There's a free runner. Jay Ness got out of the pocket, and there's an opportunity that I don't think any fan is aware of, right? Because it doesn't show up on the TV copy where Terry's open
Right.
if the protection is executed, and I can't even say the protection wasn't executed correctly because the slide's going to the left, the back has these two, he's picking the most dangerous, there's a free runner. It's a great defensive call. They kind of got you. Jaden scrambles out, ball's incomplete, and you never hear anything about that, right? They take another deep shot. I think it's the next or
After
two
the
drives.
turnover.
Yeah,
Yeah.
after the turnover, 2 drives later, they take
Yep.
that shot to Terry down the field and do the protection's good. I don't hate the throw. I don't hate the read. Just don't complete it. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the elements of some of these explosive plays that there is an element of what is it? What's the word I'm looking for? The chances of them being executed
Success
are
rate.
lower statistically, right? Success rate. Thank you. And so, well, how do you find explosive plays with higher success rates? Screens. I think Kyle Shanahan's done a great job of that over
Right.
the course of his career with play action and things like that. But there are elements of that to Cliff's offense too. It's just you don't hit them, and there's the one to Noah Brown on 3rd and 9 where you're throwing that deep ball down the field. It's a
Yeah.
one-on-one matchup versus a backup corner. Like all that, protection holds up, ball's pretty good. Don't complete it. That's three opportunities that no one's going to know about that again are low percentage low percentage opportunities. The success rate isn't high, and we're not talking about them, in this explosive offense anymore. We're talking about what's wrong with the offense. But those are
Right.
three opportunities that earlier in the year they probably would have hit on.
And the one to Terry to me is really indicative of that because you're really talking about the ball drifts a little bit
Yeah,
outside. If it stays back inside, it's a catch inside the five. You're talking about like that's why it's so high percentage because or low percentage because like you're talking about a yard or two difference on the where the ball, the trajectory of the ball. And it's just so it's why it's so hard. And early in the year against Cleveland, against Cincinnati, it's a dime. This
yeah,
time it's off by a little bit, but it's enough to make it incomplete. So it's just that's why it's so hard. You're talking about a narrow difference, but it makes a big difference. So you're right. And that could have been one inside the five or a touchdown even. So, it's not, he was getting those chances. And he's done a good job more as the season progressed, taking advantage of some of those one-on-ones with Terry. Although there was another one or two that I wondered about, could he have gone to him there? But again, you know, um, Noah Brown has
Yeah,
made some of those plays too. So
and there's another one. I think, the one that's incomplete to Zach Ertz where he's throwing that corner. And
yeah,
everyone says, oh, Terry's got the comeback isolation on the backside. But I actually like the fact that he's reading the front side of that play and not working to Terry. I would have been frustrated if he had worked to Terry on that, partially because to the front side of that
right.
concept, you have answers, right? You have a little return route, you have a corner, you have a dig, right? And basically, you just need one of those guys to win leverage, and Zach does win leverage.
He did
And they're
win.
and they're just not quite on the same page. But let's say, for example, Zach's covered and the return route wins. I've got two routes right there that would have an opportunity for the first down, as opposed to Terry, who's isolated by himself on the
Right.
backside. It would have been much more challenging. So, again, if he had worked to the front side, maybe you could get to the dig, whatever. I don't know. But I like that he chose that he made that decision. And that's one where, Dan Orlovsky's like,
Right.
oh, he's got to work to the backside here. But to me, I'm like, man, I don't hate this. Like your best third down receiver, Zach Ertz, he's got a good matchup. He wins, and you
Mhm.
have something underneath. If it is zone, you're okay. If it's man, you like the matchup. I don't hate that. And I think a lot of fans forget that, like, while Terry is a dynamic weapon in this offense and a dynamic playmaker, there are other elements. And a good
Correct.
offense is one that distributes the football relatively evenly across.
And that's what they've been doing when they were scoring a lot of points. It was distributed pretty. I mean, shoot, even against the Giants, Terry only had was 2 for 19, two
Yeah.
touchdowns, but they scored 27 points and they were on the tick in a need, or they would have had more. But even on the throw to Ertz, like I had no problem with the read because he's there. It's just that he didn't. It was the throw was off,
Yeah.
and and it looked like he's backing away and throwing off his back foot that time. So but the read looked good because he was there. So with the run game, then, it how do you boil that one down? Injuries or what? What do you think?
Yeah, I think injuries, and also I think people forget that Pittsburgh's really good.
They
Philly's
are,
really
and so is
good.
Philly.
And this front for Dallas, I know people give them a lot of heat, but they're very fast and they're quick and they move. There's a little bit of movement there and they do penetrate. And so, I'd say our best runs, or the Commanders' best runs from this year, are GT. So, guard counter pull, or guard tackle pull, excuse me, and what I would call bounce, where, either the center and the backside guard are pulling, or center and the front side guard are pulling to the perimeter, almost like an outside zone. And when you get penetration, and when you get teams that are better at fitting these and are quicker to fit the runs, you're going to have a hard time. And I do think you've seen teams be more aggressive with the Commanders over the last couple of weeks. And what I mean by that, you see higher pressure rates, you see heavier boxes. And I think they understand that on first down, Cliff really wants to run the ball on first down. Like he's a run first coordinator on first down. And so if you can limit the success rate on first down to 3 yards to 2 yards, you're now putting Jaden in a tough situation on second and long. And I think that's what you're seeing more, is you're seeing, again, the attrition of the season with the offensive line and the backs. Everyone's getting hurt. But also I think you're seeing teams play them a little bit differently. And it's smart, right? This is something that I think is intuitively correct. Is, hey, if they want to run the ball on first down, let's be more aggressive to stop the run on first down, whether that's bringing pressure, whether that's bringing a line stunt, whether that's playing heavier boxes, play a little bit more aggressive coverages on the outside with man, so we can't run these RPOs and kind of get these pick plays that we want, because they're going to be manned up nice and tight. And again, like I think that makes sense as to why they're having a harder time the last couple of weeks. Better fronts, a better awareness by the teams that they're playing. And I think this model honestly was laid down in the Cleveland game, like in terms of how they played the Commanders. Now, they didn't do it as successfully, but I think that's the roadmap. And I think these teams have engaged in a version of that, their version of it, and it's made it hard for the Commanders to run the ball.
It's funny too because I know this early in the year, like against I think I had the Bengals, Arizona, and the Browns. They were about 80% run on first down, and they were
Yeah.
moving well. Now, lately, they've thrown a little bit more on first down, but I don't know if that's because of situational things like, but 4 minutes, whatever, 2 minutes, in the game, whatever. But is the answer as simple as just throwing more, or is there different kind of runs they can get to out of this?
Yeah, I think that's a million dollar question is when you're
Right.
cultivating a good run game, you want something that the offensive line can own and they know the answers to. And right now I feel like they have the answers to a lot of what they're doing. And what I mean by that is like I feel like versus GT, they've seen a bunch of different looks, they know how to handle it. Versus bounce, they know how to handle it. I'll also say like when they run zone read, this is another kind of interesting philosophical thing that I think is kind of something to think about, is when you run a zone read, you're leaving a player unblocked. And so you're really demanding that the back like kind of cram and be super physical downhill. And, with Austin Eckler, I think that's a little bit less effective. Like I think about the way
Right.
Alfred Morris used to run
Agreed.
those
Oh
zone
God,
reads.
yeah.
Used
Hmm.
to just ram his face in there, and that's 5 yards. So you ideally you want the quarterback to pull it for the explosive play, but if he does hand it off, you need to ensure that you're getting, 4 or 5 yards on the first down run. And I do think
Agreed.
those runs have become a little bit less efficient, in terms of as with B Ron bagged up. That's not Austin's like bag of tea
Right. No, no.
necessarily. And so I do think that that's another element is runs that were better for them earlier in the year have become a little bit less effective. All the runs have become a little bit less effective. I think they were averaging almost 5 yards a carry earlier in the season, and now they're down in three.
It's
And that's
three
not a
something.
bad average. Like for the season, that'll be like 4.2, which is pretty middle of the pack. But if you're looking for a reason why the offense has regressed a little bit, it's way, 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 way harder calling a play on second and seven as opposed to second and five.
Well, it's funny because watching Dallas again, their run game was a lot of times 3rd and 1 too. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so it was different. But the other thing is on those zone reads, you had a lot of times like Dallas, Micah was coming upfield forcing the handoff.
yeah.
And then you had if they're in quarters, you have the safety fill in the hole, and it's a 3-yard stop every time. But so I felt like they did a good job. Now, different design runs with Daniel's work, but I just wonder how much you can. And like I also know we talked about this before, but I remember when you guys played Pittsburgh back in the day when Robert was here and Mike Shanahan saying it's hard to run the zone read against them because 3, 4 outside linebackers more athletic. I felt like they did a good job taking his legs away, but how much can you incorporate now going forward, needing to incorporate his legs more just because to add that other element?
Yeah, and I think the thing is, like how would you do that would be my question. And what I mean by that is like, you were talking about the 3-4 outside linebacker thing. Another reason it's hard is because there's more space. The
Right.
read's farther away. So the second I pull
Mm.
it, even if I make a bad decision, I have more space to react and run and pursue, and I'm a better athlete in space. So 100%. So I think you see a lot of teams in college. I think college is really fun to watch from like a quarterback run standpoint because you're getting quarterback GT, you're getting power, you're getting
Right.
counter, you're getting outside zone with the quarterback and running a back, but also like what kind of contacts, what kind of collisions do you want him to have
Right.
would be my question. And so to me, the zone read is simple because it allows you to protect him. And I think that's why it's been such a good run for us, something you can get to. But I do think you can diversify. It just depends on how you're going to get there. Like for example, they ran a little bit of GT in the Philly game, and Philly just stuffed that thing right up. And when you look at the counts of the box in those
Yeah.
GTs, you're like, this should be a touchdown. But again, you're getting a little bit physically outmatched at times with the offensive line. So do you want to risk, calling a play like that when you're running into a bad look per se? And so that's something to keep an eye on. Also, like, can you kind of disguise the runs a little bit more based on formation, based on tendency, based on motion? And Cliff has done a really good job of that throughout the year. But I think
Mhm.
this is why late in the year stuff is really hard because you need to kind of take it to the next level. Like we've run this motion before with this run. Is there another way we can kind of hide it, make it look a little bit different? And so I think again, that's where having a bye week earlier is really helpful because you can then self scout and say like, how do we kind of tweak and manage and use this differently? So, in answer to your question, yes, I think it's important that they keep running him. It just the question is how you do
Sure.
it to keep him healthy and to keep the offense efficient. Because say what you want, I think he's still playing really good football.
I agree.
It's throwing the football and making good decisions. So you want him as the quarterback, but you also want to make sure you're elevating the run game too. So it's this weird kind of this paradox.
With Cliff, because obviously now the conversation is, oh, second half of the seasons, teams figure them out, et cetera. When I'm looking at again, I'm looking at this as really being 2 games right now for the offense, and whether or not it continues, we'll see. But it's again Philly and Dallas game. So, what do you think about that narrative?
I think it's again, is there something to it because it's happened in the past? Sure, but I also think it can be kind of a lazy narrative because I think when you look
Right,
at his time in Arizona, for example, like Kyler Murray gets hurt a year. D Hop, who's their number one receiver and is leading the NFL in receptions and yardage, gets hurt for the last 8 games of the season. Zach gets hurt while he's there. And the offense is totally neutered and totally
Right.
different than what it would be with those players in there. And I think you're going to be hard pressed to find an offense that's effective without their starting quarterback, starting receiver, and starting tight end. So while that is true, the offense did regress. I also think there were other factors that contributed to
Correct.
that. And so, and I know he had some regressions in college. That's all. It's valid. There are some reasons, but I'm also saying there are some counterfactuals that make it difficult to say it's Cliff regressing. What I would also say is when I watch it, I'm also like, I don't know if it is regressing.
Right.
I look at the fourth quarter of this game, and I'm like, that's what the offense looks like. And what were they able to do? They're able to find again first down efficiency and explosive plays. And I look at earlier in the game, and again, this is the margin for error. They're throwing a slant on 3rd and 2 to Noah Brown. It's the
Right.
correct read. It's a good ball. Noah is the slightest degree too high, and the ball is incomplete, and they have to punt. That's the kind of margin for error we're talking about on these other
Right.
plays. It's even on some of the runs. It's guys where maybe like on the reverse to De'Ami Brown, for example. They didn't get the backside combination, didn't get it targeted to the front side player correctly, and that guy ends up making the tackle.
Right.
If they target it correctly to that guy, that might be a touchdown. And we're not talking about the offensive regression. We're talking about guys being in good position to be successful.
Right.
Now, do they need to rep that more in practice? Do they need to talk about different looks? Sure, 100%. But again, I think the play design is good. I think the play execution is a little bit lacking. And again, can Cliff, we talked about that with the run game, can Cliff continue to evolve and grow and kind of continue to disguise some of the stuff they do well? Absolutely. But I think it's so hard to say right now that Cliff's offense is regressing. Let me give you another example. Is San Francisco's offense regressing right now? Yes, Brock Purdy's hurt. Brandon Ayuk is out. Like you see that across the league when the starters are out, the offense isn't going to be as good. And so they're playing better teams, they're playing better defenses. I'm going to give it another week before I start making referendums about whether or not Cliff is still a good
Right.
offensive coordinator or a good offensive mind.
Right. And the hard part is like to me, it also this last couple weeks it's highlighted the need for another playmaker opposite.
Just more playmakers, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's what you always need. I don't care what level you're at, whether it's me coaching flag football with my kids back in the day, you're in high school.
Yeah, right.
It's always going to come down to how many playmakers do you have, especially at the end of the year where teams know you more, can you get someone who can take nothing and make it into something?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And when you look at the top teams in the NFL right now, like Detroit, how many playmakers do they have? They have two backs. They have multiple receivers. They have an excellent offensive line.
The
Look
O
at
line, yeah,
the Philadelphia Eagles, excellent offensive line, multiple playmakers, great receiver depth. They have multiple backs that can hurt you. They have one of the best backs in the NFL. They have a quarterback that can hurt you. When you add more weapons, it takes the onus off the play caller. And what I mean by that is when I'm calling plays or when anybody's calling plays, you say this is the perfect play. But the players need to make it come to life.
right.
And not that these guys aren't making it come to life. It's just easier when you have AJ Brown who can run vertical and be 5 yards past the DB and you can throw the ball to him for a touchdown. Or Saquon Barkley who can take an outside zone that's well blocked, 70 yards for a touchdown. There are a
Right.
lot of backs that can get that for 20, but having that guy that can get it to 70 is special. And think about how easy that is for an offensive play caller. So instead of now getting the ball from our, let's say, 30 to their 30 and I have to call more plays into the red zone, shoot, it's a touchdown. I save all my good red zone plays. I feel great. And that's the benefit of playmakers. And
Mhm.
so that's another element of this that's hard to kind of navigate is
Right.
not that this is a bad football team, not that they're
No.
not trying hard, not that they're not fun to watch, not that they're not competitive. All those things are true. But how many draft picks from the last regime are here helping out on this offense right now? And I can think of one, right? And that's not that drafts hard, that free agency's hard. I'm not criticizing them, but there is a lack of general depth and
Oh,
talent here
for
that
sure.
makes it hard to be successful.
For sure. And I think that's going to be an off-season thing, but that's why, but I think it's the hard part for fans, like they start off so well offensively
Yeah,
that it's like, uh-oh, if you had gone in reverse, then people would have said, oh yeah, that's the progression, right? But it doesn't always work like that. And I do think the O-line injuries also add to it. I think there's a lot of
yeah.
factors with it, but this team needs a bind the woods. Last thing then, and first of all, I always appreciate your time. But when you have a late buy like this, how hard is it on players, especially when you're hurt? Like, how much are you kind of like just kind of wheezing to that bye week?
It's really really hard. It's really hard physically, and it's especially hard mentally. If you're banged up, so I remember I tore my MCL, and I hate talking about myself in my playing career. In 2013, I tore my MCL in week 4 versus the Raiders, or week 3, and it was a grade 2 tear, and I played the entire season on it. So that's me getting there early for treatment. That's me getting taped, an hour before practice every day. That's me coming in every off day to handle that thing. And you just don't get a mental departure from the grind of the NFL. And like people know who are trainers and coaches, you can't be redlining every single day. But when you have an injury or when you're a little bit nicked up, it adds to the workload that you're dealing with because you got to do so much more to make sure your body's ready each and every week. And when that bye is right in the middle, it's just such a nice breath of fresh air because you're like, oh, okay, I have some time to kind of not be in meetings all the time, really focus on my healing, really focus on my family, and get right. And so the fact that this sucker is, what is it, week 14? Is that right? Week 14
Something like
is,
13, yeah.
yeah, week 13, week
14,
14
14, 14, yeah.
is
14.
is tough mentally because it's you're navigating all these injuries, you're navigating all the health, but you're also navigating having to be at 100% for 14 consecutive weeks, which is extremely, extremely challenging. And I was talking to Fred Smoot about it, and he was like, I think it's unsafe to a certain extent to force players to play this long without that kind of decompress week. Which again, I'm not going to complain about the NFL, but I think that's a very valid point, and I never think Fred has any valid points. So that's why that's so important.
No, I would agree with that. Listen, it's a grind for anybody, and let alone when you're out there physically doing what you're doing. I don't know. It's really hard to get to that finish, and they just need to get through this game. And if they can get through with the win, that's even better for them. So anyway, Logan, tell people where they can find. I know there are a lot of things I always ask you, but I know they should know where you're at now. And I know Craig Hoffman likes to take credit for what you guys do, but no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, so Take Command podcast with Craig, two shows a week. Obviously, I do the stuff with the team. We got the Command Center podcast. We got the Command Center show. Those are all on YouTube. I do the in-game radio with Bram in London, which has been a ton of fun. And obviously my Instagram, Logan_Paulsen82, where I try to post some of the breakdowns and stuff that I do. So that's it. I think all of them. But yeah.
It's a lot, man. And it's well deserved. So I'm glad every year you're getting more and more, and it's so deserved, man. I appreciate it. So thanks for coming on, Logan.
Thanks, man. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. You know that, right?
Don't forget it. No, no, listen, that is not true. So I appreciate
It
it.
is
But
100% true. You were the one who said, "Man, you should get into this." And I was like, "Okay, cool, I will."
well, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you listened, and everybody else should thank me for that, for you doing it. Because like the insight is, I said, I've told people like you're clearly one of the smartest players I've ever covered, not just in terms of like book smart, but just knowing the game and knowing how to communicate it and knowing how to explain it at a very good level so people can understand it. Because some people like to talk over people, you do not. And
Hmm.
so I
Thank
really
you.
think that's why people enjoy listening to you. So I appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Logan for joining me, and thank you as always for tuning in. Have a happy Thanksgiving, folks. I'll talk to you on Saturday with my 5 things I think. Talk to you next time.